You know those pictures you've seen of huge crowds at political rallies?
Oh, yeah.
Like the kind of thing you might find in like your parents' photo albums or something.
Right.
Thousands of people all packed together like just to hear a politician speak.
Hmm.
It all felt so, I don't know, important somehow.
Yeah.
And then today, you just see a politician with like a few aides and a camera crew, broadcasting to millions online.
Right.
Makes you kind of wonder, has something been lost in that transition?
Yeah, it does.
And like even more importantly, do those campaigns, all carefully planned out, do they really actually change anyone's mind?
Yeah, that's the big question.
Well, that's what we're going to try to figure out today in our deep dive into British elections since 1945.
It's amazing to think about how much campaigns have changed since that post-war era.
Yeah.
But I think that really that key question is still there. Do they actually make a difference?
Yeah.
Or are they just a big show?
Right.
Like some people say, just reinforcing what people already believe.
Okay, so let's start with that post-war world 1945.
Okay.
You'd think that after this huge global conflict, people would be pretty passionate about choosing their leaders, right?
You would think so, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
But it's interesting, despite Labor's landslide victory, and that was such a huge moment in history,
Yeah.
there's actually evidence that there was a lot of apathy among voters.
Really?
Yeah, it's almost like a collective, okay, we've done our part, let's move on, sort of feeling.
Hmm. So even with Churchill on the ballot, people weren't exactly fired up.
Yeah, it's surprising, isn't it?
What explains that?
Well, some historians say that back then campaigns were less about, like, trying to persuade people
Uh-huh.
and more about just getting your own supporters to the polls.
Yeah.
It was like a giant pep rally for each party.
So the goal wasn't to win over undecideds. It was just to mobilize the base.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense, especially when party loyalty was probably stronger back then.
Yeah, you're right.
But even Churchill, I mean, the hero of the war, even he made campaign blunders, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Like what?
Like his Gestapo comment?
Oh, yeah.
When he compared a potential labor government to the Nazi secret police?
Right.
That was a major, major gaffe.
Yeah. Do we know if it actually changed anyone's vote?
That's hard to say.
Okay.
It definitely caused a stir.
Yeah, I bet it did. It makes you wonder, how do you measure the impact of like any single moment in a campaign?
Right.
Like, how can we be sure what really connects with voters
Yeah.
and what makes them decide, okay, I'm going to vote for this person?
That is the question, isn't it? It's so hard to isolate the impact of any one thing someone says, especially back then.
Yeah.
Opinion polling wasn't nearly as sophisticated as it is today.
So we have to kind of piece it together from different sources.
We do. We have historical accounts and we have media coverage from back then.
Yeah.
But we always have to keep in mind the bigger picture.
You know, social and political context.
Exactly.
It's almost like being a detective.
It is. It is.
Yeah. You're like sifting through clues, trying to figure out how the voters were thinking.
Absolutely.
But just like detective work, we're probably left with more questions than answers, right?
Probably, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's the exploring those questions that gives us a better understanding of how campaigns work.
Right.
How they've changed over time
Mm-hmm.
and how much they really matter.
It sounds like in 1945, it was more about just going through the motions than some kind of passionate battle for votes.
Yeah, you could say that.
But things changed pretty dramatically in the 1960s, right?
They did.
I mean, television comes along.
Right.
And suddenly image is everything.
That's right. The 1960s were a turning point, not just in Britain, but really everywhere.
Yeah.
I mean, Kennedy beating Nixon in the U.S. really showed how powerful television could be.
And British politicians saw that.
Oh, yeah, they were paying attention.
It's wild to think how that one American election with the televised debates and everything changed politics over here.
It really did. It changed the whole game.
Yeah.
Suddenly, it wasn't enough to have good policies,
It was about how you looked on TV.
You had to look good, sound good, and project confidence.
Okay, so no more huge rallies with big speeches.
Well, not quite.
But there were more carefully planned events.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And sound bites made for the evening news.
Right.
And a lot more focus on the personality.
Exactly. It was a shift from substance to style.
It's like the whole horse race idea came in then,
It did.
where elections are framed as a contest between two people.
Right. Not a clash of ideas.
Yeah. And that focus on personality, that brought in some interesting characters, right?
Oh, definitely.
Like Harold Wilson
Oh, Wilson.
and the way he could handle hecklers at those rallies.
He was a master. So quick, so witty.
Imagine that today.
Can you imagine a politician today just brushing off a heckler with a joke?
I can't.
Those events were raw, They were unpredictable,
Yeah.
far more interesting than what we see today. These completely controlled, stage-managed things.
Yeah, it does make you think, have we lost something?
Yeah.
In our pursuit of the perfect image, have we sacrificed something real?
Maybe we have. I think that's something worth thinking about.
Yeah.
Have we traded authenticity for artificiality?
Yeah.
Spontaneity for carefully crafted sound bites?
It seems like political discourse changed completely when television arrived.
It really does. It's easy to kind of look back at those old rallies with like rose-tinted glasses,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
But we got to remember the world is a very different place than it was back in the 1960s.
Right. I mean, we can't ignore how the 24-hour news cycle on the internet, social media, all that stuff, how it's changed things.
Exactly, exactly. I mean, in today's world where there's just like information coming at us from every direction,
Yeah.
it's got to be so hard for any message to cut through all that noise.
Right.
So does that mean campaigns are basically pointless now?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's a big question.
Yeah, it feels like we're just constantly bombarded with political stuff everywhere we look. Our phones, TV, even those targeted ads that like follow you around online.
Yeah,
It's exhausting, honestly.
it is.
How can any candidate actually stand out in all that?
Well, some people say campaigns are more about just strengthening what people already believe.
Okay, so not changing minds, just reinforcing existing views.
Yeah, kind of. It's about tapping into those fears and hopes and biases that are already there.
So not really enlightening people, just reflecting back what they already think.
Yeah, that's one way to look at it.
That's kind of depressing.
It can be, yeah. But there are people who think that campaigns can still make a difference.
Really?
Yeah, they point to elections where like a certain issue or even a gaffe or maybe just like a really effective strategy really did seem to change things.
Freak the 1970 election.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the one where England lost in the World Cup right before the vote.
Mhm.
It's practically legendary now.
It is, yeah.
Some say it like created this national feel-bad mood, and that helped Labor lose.
It's a great example of how things you can't control can totally mess with an election.
Yeah.
I mean, we can't say for sure if the football loss was the reason, but
Right.
it shows just how unpredictable campaigns are.
Yeah.
All these different things can come into play.
Okay, speaking of unpredictable, 1979, that's when Margaret Thatcher came to power.
Right.
Big shift for British politics.
Huge.
Was that because of her campaign, or was it just, the way things were going in the country at that time?
That's a tough one. A lot of people still debate that.
Yeah.
She was a very, very effective campaigner, that's for sure.
Right.
But you got to remember what was happening back then.
Yeah, like the winter of discontent the year before.
Exactly. With all the strikes and the economy in a mess, it felt like a real crisis.
Yeah, a lot of voters were ready for a change.
They were, and Thatcher was brilliant at tapping into that feeling.
She really came across as strong and decisive, didn't she?
Yeah, and like she was ready to shake things up.
Exactly.
And she was a real innovator when it came to campaigning.
Found that way.
She really understood how to use television. She got the power of image, the importance of looking good on camera,
Right.
and she knew how to get her message to the right people.
And her 1983 campaign,
Oh, yeah.
those labor's tax bombshell ads?
Yeah, those are classic.
They really played on people's fear of, financial hardship.
Whether you liked her policies or not, you got to admit those ads were effective.
Oh, yeah, definitely effective. You think they went too far?
Yeah.
Like, into fear-mongering?
Maybe. Some would say that, yeah.
Yeah.
But there's no denying the impact they had.
No.
Thatcher's campaigns, the way they looked and what they said, it set a new standard.
Yeah, and that's still influencing campaigns today.
It is.
But as other politicians started using her tactics, did something get lost?
That's a good question.
Like, did this focus on winning at any cost, on getting that perfect soundbite and, spinning things?
Right.
Did it come at the cost of real political debate?
That's something people worried about a lot back in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah.
Soundbite politics were on the rise. The news cycle was getting faster and faster.
Yeah, it felt like politicians were more worried about how things looked than what they actually meant.
Right.
But even then, you still had people like Neil Kinnock,
Oh, yeah.
who seemed to really connect with voters,
Yeah. Yeah.
His speeches were powerful.
He was a gifted speaker, no question.
Yeah. He could get a crowd going.
He could.
Articulate a vision for the future.
But even his talent as a speaker didn't always translate into votes.
Yeah, he had a tough opponent in Thatcher.
That's for sure.
And the political landscape was changing fast.
It was.
Makes you wonder, can charisma, that genuine connection with voters, can it really beat a well-organized political machine?
Yeah.
Like, can a powerful speech actually sway voters?
It's a big question, isn't it? I mean, look, some elections, maybe a candidate's personality or a really great speech does make the difference.
Yeah.
But plenty of times, it's just not enough. You've got to factor in public opinion, the economy, just the general mood of the country.
It's like trying to sail a boat when the wind is against you.
That's a good analogy.
Mm.
And as we get into the more recent decades, there's this growing feeling of disillusionment.
Yeah, people feel like politics is letting them down.
Voter turnout's down. People feel like their vote doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You have to wonder, is that a sign that campaigns have lost their power?
Hmm.
Have people become so cynical, so bombarded with all this political noise that they've just tuned out?
It's a worrying trend, isn't it?
It is.
If people stop believing that their voice matters, that things can change, that's when democracy starts to break down.
Absolutely. And that apathy, that can have real consequences.
Like what?
Well, if fewer people vote, the results might not really reflect what the whole country wants,
Right.
which just leads to less trust in the system.
Yeah. The vicious cycle. So how do we break that?
How do we get people excited about democracy again? How do we make them feel like their voice counts?
Yeah, good question.
That's the challenge, isn't it?
It feels like a big one.
It is. I think it needs a lot of different things to change.
Like what?
Well, we need a system that's more responsive, that listens to people.
Yeah.
We need leaders people can actually trust,
Uh-huh.
leaders who put the country first, not just their own party.
Right.
And they need to be willing to talk to each other, actually have real discussions.
It's about believing that your vote, your voice, can actually make a difference.
Exactly. That we're not just along for the ride. We're helping to steer the ship.
It's easy to get caught up in all the details of campaigns, the
Yeah.
strategies and the sound bites and the personalities.
Right.
But it all comes down to people, doesn't it?
It does. Real people making choices that affect their lives.
Exactly. We can't forget that human side of things.
No, we can't. Politics isn't some abstract game,
Right.
It's about people's hopes and their struggles.
Yeah.
And campaigns, when they're done right, they can give a voice to those experiences.
It makes you think about the people who feel like they're not part of it all.
Yeah.
The ones who've become cynical and just checked out.
Right.
I mean, if you believe your vote doesn't matter
Yeah.
or that the system is rigged, then why bother?
It's understandable that people tune out. And that apathy, it has consequences.
Yeah, like what?
Well, if fewer people vote, the results might not represent everyone,
Right.
And then people trust the system even less, and it just keeps getting worse.
So how do we stop that? How do we make people care about democracy again?
That's the big question, isn't it?
It is.
I think it needs a lot of changes.
Yeah.
A system that actually listens to people,
Mm-hmm.
leaders who are trustworthy,
Yeah.
who actually care about the country, not just their own party.
Mm-hmm.
And they need to be able to have conversations,
Right. Real discussions.
Exactly.
It's about believing that your voice can actually change something.
It is. It's about feeling like you're part of something bigger.
Yeah, like you're helping to shape the future, not just watching it happen.
Well said.
We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive,
We have.
from those big rallies after the war to the age of television,
Right.
and now this crazy media landscape we have today.
It's been quite a journey.
We've seen how campaigns have changed, how they affect the way we talk about politics,
Yeah.
and how they reflect, good or bad, who we are as a society.
Throughout all of it, there's that one question,
Yeah, do campaigns really matter?
I don't think there's an easy answer.
Right.
They might not always decide who wins an election.
But they can change what issues we focus on,
They can.
how we think about our leaders,
Absolutely.
and how we talk about politics in general.
So even if you think one campaign can't do that much,
Yeah.
there's still a big part of that conversation that shapes democracy.
Exactly. It's like a platform for
Okay.
debate and for voters to engage with ideas.
And a reminder that, at least in theory, the people still have the power.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with this thought.
Okay.
Next time you see a political campaign,
Yeah.
whether it's an ad on TV or a speech or a debate online, really think about what it's saying.
What's the message underneath?
What anxieties is it playing on? What hopes is it trying to tap into?
And how is it affecting your own understanding of the issues?
Because even with all the information overload and political fighting we see today,
Right.
there are still times when a campaign can cut through all that
There are.
and really connect with people
Yeah.
and remind us that we have power as citizens in a democracy.
Those are the moments we need to pay attention to,
Yeah.
engage with, and fight for.
Thank you for joining us on this journey through British election campaigns.
It's been a pleasure.
We hope you've learned something new, questioned some of your assumptions,
Yeah.
and maybe even come away feeling a little more hopeful about the power of our collective voice.
Thanks for listening.